Hello, everyone. Welcome to the second part of Socrates and the Sophists. Here, I want to focus a little bit on Socrates. I also want to mention that I want to kind of review real quick the idea of skepticism and relativism, which is so important. Um, these and also the go back to the history and the connection between history, the wars, the politics, and philosophy. We saw the Greco-Persian War was an important part, background that eventually led to the golden age of what we call Greek culture and Greek philosophy and Greek thought, um, and the rise of democracy, Pericles, and so on. Um, in the same way, once Greece was at its height, there started to develop internal problems. And eventually, these internal problems, particularly between city states, Sparta and Athens, ultimately led to a civil war, which is very different. So, this was now the Peloponnesian Wars were a different kind of sort of tragedy among the Greek city states, um, and and these were very different from the Greco-Persian Wars, where the Greeks actually came together to fight the Persians. Here, it was more of a destructive war from within. So we need to be mindful that um, after this great rise came this great fall. And the Peloponnesian Wars, so you have a time reference, was at the end of Socrates' life. And this sort of lack of confidence, the lack of openness, the death of Pericles, all of this was partly uh, uh, in the background when ultimately Socrates, the great thinker, the great critical thinker, Socrates, the one who questioned everyone, was ultimately executed in 399 by the Athenian democracy. So they voted to execute him, and you need to keep in mind that this whole political downfall of Greece is in the background, and the Peloponnesian Wars. So you have an idea went from 431 to 404. So this was right at almost at the end and of Socrates' life, at the last 20, 30 years of Socrates' life, and Socrates was killed just 5 years after the end of the war. So to keep that all this in mind is very important. Now, going back to skepticism, again, let me just sort of highlight this. The skeptic believes that knowledge is not possible. Now, I think there could be two ways you can interpret that. One is it's not possible because we don't have sufficient capacity to obtain knowledge. We are finite and limited human beings, and therefore our process of knowing is restricted. We can't obtain ultimate knowledge because of our finitude or our lack of power of knowing, right? We're not omniscient beings. That's one interpretation. The second interpretation is that there is no such thing as knowledge or ultimate knowledge, and that's why we can't obtain it. It's not because we don't have the power to do it. Even if we were omniscient, we wouldn't be able to obtain knowledge about certain things. So we could make the distinction. The first one we can call practical skepticism. So in practice, we just don't have, the technology or the capacity to know certain things. And the other kind of skepticism, we can say it's skepticism in principle. So you can't, even if you had all the technology in the world and you had all of the sort of unlimited power of knowing, you still could not know it because there is no knowledge on these certain topics or certain areas. So, two different kinds of skepticism. Skepticism is different from relativism. And in relativism, you hold kind of the opposite view, right? It's not that you can't know, it's that you can know. But what you know is going to be very different from what other people know because truth is relative. So don't confuse skepticism with relativism because in some ways they are opposites. So the relativist does believe that you can obtain knowledge and truth. It's just that the truth is going to vary from culture to culture, from person to person, and so on. Now, the Greeks made an important distinction, which is emphasized in the book and which you should definitely know, which is the distinction between physis and nomos. Physics, the physical world, science maybe, and norms, or the normative, or the ethical, customary customs. So we today we could say something like these are descriptive propositions. The world is this way or that way. These are the principles and laws that govern the world. And some might say that these are not relative truths. They're not relative, and that we have common truths about physics or physis or about the world or about descriptive claims about the way the world is. But when it comes to nomos or normative claims or claims about customs, for instance, how you bury your dead, there is no common truth because these are truths that are ultimately dependent on the culture or on the persons that the perspective of the individuals um, that are exploring or examining the question. So that distinction is extremely important. If the question then becomes whether things like virtues are more like theses or more like nomos, is there questions about the good, beauty, things like this? Are they more like customs and taste, or are they more like descriptive claims about the world? Uh, Another big question that the Greeks will argue and debate about, and you will see this in Plato's Republic, is the question of justice. So, is justice something that we discover? Is it more like physis, like the physics of the universe? Is it a descriptive claim, or is it more like normative, customary taste claims? So, this is going to be a big issue, a big debate. Now, where do the Sophists come on this question? The Sophists believe that they are different, that customs are relative, physis or physics is not. Socrates will disagree with the Sophists. So Socrates is not a skeptic in principle. Socrates believes that there is truth. Socrates is not a relativist either. That is extremely important, and that is what makes a big difference between the Sophist and Socrates. In addition to that, there are other things. Socrates does not teach for success. Socrates does not take money for his teachings in quotations. Socrates claims that he doesn't teach anything at all. And that's important, and we will see why he says that. Socrates believes that the most important thing in philosophy is the search for truth, the honest and sincere search for truth. Socrates is not interested in winning the argument. In fact, he says he prefers to be shown that he's wrong because this alleviates him from the possibility of being in error and continuing on in this way. He is grateful when someone finds or discovers a problem with his arguments. He believes, again, the most important thing in life is to continue the search, not to give up, not to fall into skepticism or relativism. And he also thinks we should never assent to a proposition that we do not really believe. So there's a kind of sincerity here. You need to be sincere about your arguments and about your premises and about the propositions that you assent to. Socrates' technique is very special. It's dialectic, and dialectical techniques have to do with questions and answers. It's about a debate, about a discussion. Very important for today's world. This idea, this dialectical technique that consists of questions and answers, there is a whole philosophical thinking about behind this, right? Because the idea is that by questioning an answer, we obtain knowledge that we have already inside. We're not taught by introducing new data. We are taught by thinking through the information. Our own thinking, the questions are just sort of prodding us, moving us to ask the right questions ourselves about what we believe and so on. And this ultimately, this self-reflection, this examination of our beliefs and why we believe what we believe, this thinking produces new knowledge. So it's a very rationalistic, the dialectical method is very rationalistic idea based, and with the assumption that knowledge, we're sort of impregnated in some ways with knowledge, and we just need to sort of wake it up. It's in our conscious somewhere, right? So this, we'll see more of this later in Plato. This is why, of course, why all of Plato's works are dialogues, and Socrates is always the main character in Plato's dialogues. Remember, Socrates never wrote anything. So all the works where Socrates, we know anything about Socrates, are in Plato's dialogues. There's no dogmatism here, right? Because everything's up for question, everything's up for analysis, everything is up for examination, and this is extremely important. Finally, I would say the 4 convictions that the book introduces are also very important. And I've mentioned some. One, we ought to search for truth. This is a conviction that Socrates holds on to always. Human excellence has to do with knowledge, and that's why searching for knowledge entails truth, right? To know something is to have evidence for the fact that it's true. So he sees this, interestingly enough, not knowledge that's speculative knowledge, but for Socrates it's going to be applied knowledge, which is very important. So he calls it techne. Techne is like applied knowledge, like when the knowledge of a craftsman, right? Knowing how to do something. In this case, it's applied knowledge about life, knowing how to live rightly. So all wrongdoing, he thinks, is due to ignorance. If human excellence has to do with knowledge, then human failure has to do with ignorance. This is very important. Many philosophers will disagree. Even Aristotle will disagree with this. The most important thing of all for Aristotle, for Socrates, is to care for your soul, your mind, okay? Not your body, your mind. The nurturing of the mind, your soul and the mind, the same thing, is the most important goal and purpose in life. And you do this by the dialectical method, by questioning and examining your beliefs, and the continued process that never ends, right? It gets closer and closer to truth as you examine further and examine further. So I hope that this helps you introduces you to Socrates. We will be delving into his life a little more through Plato's dialogues in the next chapters. Thank you.